2012 Tableau Customer Conference. In a recent study, only 8% of people who were surveyed would say that their organization deserves an A in the ability to transform data into effective insights. You all know that Tableau is a very powerful tool which will allow you and your organization to help you see and understand your data. However, even with this powerful tool, it is very common for dashboards to fall victim to information overload. Every day, data-driven decisions are made with the impact of billions of dollars, even people's lives are at stake. All of you in this room have the ability to influence that impact by designing interactive dashboards that allow your report consumers, whether they are executives or whoever your target audience is, you have the ability to influence them with a well-designed dashboard. My name is Coleman Wagner. I'm a product consultant at Tableau. Part of my role during evaluations is to help report creators just like yourselves develop interactive dashboards that will be presented to executives. Now, when I work with the report creators, one thing I notice is that a lot of dashboards look like this. As you can see, it has too many charts on one dashboard with really no interactive elements allowing that report consumer to drill down into their own insights into their data. So this is what the class is about today. It's advanced guided analytics. It's going to help you design interactive dashboards that will allow you and your end user, whoever your report consumer is, to logically drill down into that information. So let's talk about the guided analytics concept. Guided analytics is the concept of developing interactive dashboards and really creating them with the idea of being able to drill down with filters and hierarchies, which are some of the basic building blocks in Tableau, as well as the more advanced and powerful features, for example, Tableau Actions, which will allow you to logically navigate your dashboards. And then lastly, this is a little bit of a newer concept, but we'll talk about using parameters for interactivity, allowing your report consumers to input their own piece of information or use parameters to interact with the dashboard. And at the end of this presentation, if you're interested in learning more about parameters for interactivity, we do have another session at the conference that will focus on just that as well. I now want to go into an example dashboard that uses many of the concepts of guided analytics. Here you can see we have a Salesforce opportunity dashboard, has information about the sales reps and the total number of opportunities as well as a trend over time. But here we can make a lot of interactive selections. So I might filter to just one region. When I make that selection, you'll notice how the visualizations will update. My select a state filter as well has now been populated with just the available values for that previous selection. This is the idea of cascading quick filters. The reason why it's important is you have the ability to not only compress the amount of information that a user can then select, but it also prevents users from making a selection on a state that's not in that territory. The reason for that is it will render the view blank, which will bring them to a dead end in their analysis. So we can select a state. We also have some parameters where I can make a selection to, I want to look at the total dollars now. Notice how the visualizations are going to update now to the total dollars based on this parameter selection. Now at any time I can drill down into a hierarchy as well as see the individual transactions for each rep. Notice how my detail sheet has now been exposed to the user only after they made a selection on the report for the individual user. From there, we have the ability to make a selection in the chart, and you'll notice from the details it will link directly into our Salesforce.com account information. This is the concept of guided analytics. If this is an interesting dashboard, you want to know the concept to create it, feel free to stay, and it'll be a great session for you. If this, as a preview, is not something that you're as interested in, we have other great sessions available during this time that you can go and attend now. So let's go ahead and get started with some of the basic building blocks. I'm just going to create a new worksheet, and I'm going to go and be using my Superstore data for this example. You should all have a workbook in front of you, which you can follow along. We also, the concepts or the coursework in this presentation is you will have exercises, some of which you will complete on your own. I'll give you a little bit of time to do that. And then in the end, we will run through it together and build it out. And we also have some examples where I will just be leading you along that path of how to create each of these. And hopefully by the end, you'll have a completed workbook, which you will then be able to take home with you and provide some of these concepts in your own dashboards. So let's begin by creating hierarchies. So as we know, Tableau, once it connects to data, it simply measures and dimensions. I'm going to drag out this measure total sales, and you notice how it typically aggregates that information. And then I want to slice up that data by a dimension. So I'll drag out product category. Now, we know in our data we might have a natural relationship, for example, with product category and product subcategory. If I want to create a quick hierarchy here, it's as simple as drag and drop. So if I drag my product category field on top of product category, it's going to create that hierarchy for me. Notice there's no coding or scripting involved with creating this. It's simple and on the fly in Tableau. Now I can easily drill down into my information and expand to lower levels of detail. So we're starting with our summary view of our product categories and then being able to drill down into our product subcategories. That's the concept of creating hierarchies. It's very flexible and allows you to take any fields and easily drill down into that information. Now let's talk about quick filters, and in particular using cascading quick filters. So as you know, when you're working with a worksheet, you can right-click and choose Show Quick Filters. Now we have our available regions where a user can make some selections, and you'll notice how each of the visualizations will update based on that individual selection. Now, we talked about hierarchies and having a natural relationship between them. So a product category has a subcategory. So a region also has state. So let's add in another quick filter for state. Now notice that it's going to give me all of my available states. Well, that could be useful if I was to make a selection on the central region and then select Arizona. I'm not going to show it to you because it just looks bad, but it's going to render the view blank. So in this case, we're going to use cascading quick filters. The idea is there is the Show Fewer Values option, as well as in the drop-down arrow, we have what's called Only Relevant Values. These are the same thing. They both are used to compress the amount of information based on a previous filter selection. So for example, I might choose a compact list. And notice that if I select this to central, notice now that it's going to only show the information based on central when I choose the Show Fewer Values option. So when I make that selection, it's now only showing the values for the central region. So once again, using Show Fewer Values or using Only Relevant Values are going to be useful in providing more of a drill down within your quick filter display. I'm now going to take a moment to talk through some of these other options with quick filters because they are one of the most important building blocks when building a Tableau dashboard. Here we have the include or exclude. Those options are whether you want to, when you select an item, it's included in the filter, or whether you want to select and have it excluded from the filter. It really depends on what piece of information you want on your view. We have a variety of different options on how you might want to choose to display your quick filters. A multiple value list is great when you have a smaller number of members within a dimension. and you want to compare one or a few different options, that's a great way to use multiple value lists. A single value list is very similar to what we're looking at for region, where it provides radio buttons for an individual selection of one member within that dimension. A custom value list is often used when you have a large number of members within the dimension and you want to type in a value, and it's going to then present you with the options that contain that substring. So that could be useful if you have order IDs and you wanted to filter to order ID number 18. If you type in 18, Tableau is going to then provide you a multiple value list of any members within that dimension that include 18. So it might be 18, it might be 180, so that way you can make individual selections based off of the search. A compact list is great when you have a larger list of members within the dimension and you still want a single value list. One of the key problems that I always hear about from customers really is I just don't have enough screen real estate on my dashboard to include all of the filters that I need as well as all the sheets that I need. So that's where we're going to might use a compact list to condense the single value options, as well as we'll use actions to navigate from dashboard to dashboard so you don't feel forced to place all of your sheets on one dashboard. Next, we have a slider, which is a great option when, for example, there's a natural flow with the members within the dimension. Maybe you're looking at months. You know, months obviously go from January to December. You might choose a slider where a user can easily slide across in that logical way. A wildcard match is similar to the custom value list in its search box functionality, but it won't present you with the available options. It will just filter everything that contains the substring of information. But that still can be very useful in your analysis. And lastly, one thing I like to show is this customize option. That includes the buttons at the top of the filter for the search button or include or exclude, as well as the show more or fewer values button. But the most common use case is the show all button, where I don't want to be able to select all information on one view, so you require a user to only select a single piece of information. It will never render a view with all the information on it. So that's one thing that I typically will deselect, depending on how crowded the view is going to be with information. Also, it's a best practice to add a title to your filters to really provide instructions to your end users or your consumers to interact with the view. Tell them to select a region and then select a state. Give them some direction on how to use the dashboard. So now we're going to move on, and I'm going to have you guys work through this dashboard exercise 1. We can pause. Now we have our dashboard exercises. This is the first set of our exercises. As you can see here, I've provided some instructions for, I want you to create a hierarchy as well as add in our quick filters on the dashboard. And this shouldn't take you very long because I've showed you how to add in this information from a worksheet. And so it should be very similar to on a dashboard. So let's first, I'll pause, give them. All right, so the time is up to complete that portion of the exercise. So now let's talk through it. So first, let's talk about creating that hierarchy. So as we know, we go back to the sheet, and we begin by creating hierarchies. Now, if you're just using the sheet that I started with, it'll naturally have the hierarchy for product category and product subcategory. Now, if you weren't following along, once again, you're going to simply drag and drop a field on top of another to create the hierarchy, as well as you can easily add fields to the hierarchy by dragging and dropping within that hierarchy. One thing to note that if you ever have an instance where a field is part of multiple hierarchies, so maybe my region is also in my state hierarchy. Now, you can't place a field in multiple hierarchies without first duplicating this field. So once again, right-click, choose to duplicate, and that will be able to then create this hierarchy. If we were to create one for region and state, I can then, once again, to create hierarchies, it's as simple as the drag and drop. So that's how to create hierarchies. If we go back to the dashboard, the next exercise is to add in our quick filters for region, state, and city. So to add quick filters on a dashboard, the easiest way to do it is to click this drop-down arrow, and it'll have the quick filters option. So this is where I can say I want to add in my quick filter for region. It seems to populate it down here. I'm just going to move it over to the left side of the dashboard. So now we have our quick filter for region. I also want to add for state. Once again, going into that menu, selecting it for state. Now I might choose to make this the single value list. So maybe I want to make this a single value list. So I make that selection, and now notice that typically as a default, Tableau will add the show more or fewer values, especially if you've already done this type of filter on another sheet. But notice now we have our quick filter. When I select the southern region, notice how the state filter below it is updated with only those values. You can do the same thing for city, but at the same time we'll just go into our third exercise, which I'll run through with you together, which is the use as filter. So the quick filters are easy for interactivity, as well as adding in the use as filter option, which will be able to provide the end user to make a selection on a sheet within the dashboard and run it to affect the other views. So this is a shortcut in Tableau to simply choose this drop-down arrow and choose use as filter. So now when I make a selection here in Montana for Bozeman, notice how each of my other visualizations are now going to update when I make that selection. To illustrate how to create Tableau actions, I'm going to go into this dashboard menu and choose actions. This is where you can edit actions. Notice how, because of that shortcut, Tableau has automatically generated a filter action for the map sheet. So I'm going to go ahead and edit and walk through all of the available options in the screen. So the important thing in the beginning is the idea of a source sheet and a target sheet. A source sheet is what you're going to actually select in the dashboard. It doesn't necessarily have to be a dashboard. It can be a sheet within your workbook that can run an action on another dashboard, for example. There's a lot of flexibility, but the source sheet is where you're making the initial selection. So this could be a dashboard, or this could be another sheet. But right now we're running from the map sheet, and it's going to affect other sheets, which is our target sheets. So once again, it could be another dashboard. I can choose, well, maybe I want it to only affect the time trend. I can just simply make those fields deselected, and now when I run it, it'll only select or run the action on the time trend view. You can choose how you want the action to run. Typically, with a filter action, I like to run it on select. It's just very easy to make a single selection when you click the mouse. When I'm doing highlighting, a highlight action, which I'll show in the next part of this exercise, I typically like to run those on hover. So when I hover over a mark, I don't actually click. I just simply hover my mouse over, and it'll provide that highlighting. A menu is going to provide typically a link within the tooltip. So if you're familiar with the tooltip, when you hover over a mark, it's going to provide some details. This is where it will provide a link for you to run that menu. But I typically like to use the menu when filtering from a dashboard to another dashboard. It's a lot easier to say go to dashboard 2 and then run it on menu. We also have the clearing these selections. So show all values, when I deselect on this map, what it would do is it would reset each view to all of the data. So show all of my values. Leave the filter is used when you deselect. It's going to just keep the view that was affected still filtered to that same selection. So I don't use that as often as I do show all values. Exclude all values is an option where when you deselect the mark on the map, it's going to essentially make the other views blank. So it's going to exclude all values until a user makes a selection. In this case, you'll use this to hide a detailed sheet as similar to how I did in the Salesforce dashboard. When I made that selection on the opportunity, it then shows me the details based on that opportunity owner. So that's when you're going to use the exclude all values option. Lastly, we have what are called target filters. So this could be used if, for example, you wanted to make a selection on the map, and it's going to, based on your selection of a city, you really want it to filter another view only to the state level. So it can change levels of detail, as well as, just to give you an idea, it allows you to select data sources. So later in this presentation, we'll walk through how to filter across data sources. And so we could choose a field from our Superstore data source, and if this dashboard had a sheet from another data source, we can then there choose to add that other field from the second data source and filter across both. So that's going to be very useful as well if you were to work with multiple data sources, which I know most of you do. So I'm just going to cancel out of that now that we have talked through the different options. And lastly, we have the ability to do some highlighting. So based on a selection. So now we're going to move on to highlighting. So highlighting is useful when you want to really draw out the information of a particular piece of the dimension. So here we have some highlighting based on legends. So if I choose my East region and choose this highlight button, what you're going to notice is it's going to highlight each of the sheets based on that level of the dimension. So notice that even the map itself has colors based on the East region. Now, if there wasn't the region level of detail on the map, this map would be grayed out. And one way to fix that is to add the region field to the level of detail if it's not there. Or you can once again go in and edit the action that was generated. So remember, when you do some of these quick shortcuts with Tableau, it's going to add generated actions for you. You could then edit it and choose that it doesn't want to affect the map. And then now when I make a selection, notice it's not affecting the map. So those are the ways to get around that when you're highlighting fields and something gets grayed out and doesn't look quite right. The two options are typically you're going to add that field to the level of detail or edit the action so that it doesn't affect the sheet that is causing the issue or is not performing as expected. So this concludes the first exercise. Let's move into our second dashboard exercise, where what you will do is just, because I've given you the concepts, you now can apply these within these sheets and perform these exercises. So now let's go ahead and begin by adding some actions. So our first exercise was to add a filter action that from this product sheet is only going to affect the time trend sheet, and we're running it on select. So what we'll do here is go into dashboard, actions. This is where we're going to add actions. So there's three types of actions. We've already talked about filter and highlight actions. We'll talk about URL actions later in the presentation, but we're going to be using a filter action. Now you need to specify the source sheet. So the source sheet is where you're initially clicking. So that's going to be the product sheet. So I will deselect to only the product sheet. And now we're going to look at our target sheet, which we wanted the target sheet to be the time trend. So we're going to make deselect to filter only from the products to the time trend sheet. And once again, we're going to run on select. Now, what you'll notice is when I make a selection, it's going to filter down the time trend based on my selection. Next, we're going to add the highlight action from the product sheet to the map. So once again, we're going to add actions. This time, we're going to make use of our highlight action from our product sheet to our map. I want to choose to run this on hover, so to give you the idea of when you hover over a mark, it's going to highlight. Now when I choose OK and I hover over a mark, you'll notice that it's going to highlight to the central region, now to the east region. If I make a selection, it's going to filter down that time trend as well as highlight. Lastly is to create the action that will hide the details sheet. So you might remember from the beginning of the presentation when I was talking about the different action options is using the exclude all values option is going to provide that ability to hide a sheet and have it only render based on a selection. So let's add that action as well. Dashboard actions, you should be getting familiar with these. We're going to add the filter action from the mapped view to the detail sheet. Running on select, and this is where you're going to choose the exclude all values. So now, when I make a selection on the map, it's going to filter down the view. Now notice that it collapsed the details sheet. The reason for that is I have a layout container, which if you're not familiar with layout containers, we probably will be talking about them in one of our dashboard basics classes. But what it'll allow is now when I deselect, notice it's not showing any details. So even if I multi-select, it's going to show all the details for only the cities that I selected. I deselect, it's going to hide it. So this is very useful, especially when working with crosstabs and details, because if you had all the details for the map, you're going to get a long scroll bar to scroll down, and really you're not going to find any information. This is providing that logical drill down of you make a selection initially, and then it's going to update the views. Now that we've completed this dashboard exercise 2, we'll go ahead and move on to dashboard exercise 3, which really is going to solve the problem of working with multiple data sources on a dashboard. So as you know, here we have a dashboard that looks very similar to the other dashboards, but we have another data source. We have some coffee market sales information. But what you'll notice here is when I make a selection for the East region, it's going to be a global filter, which is only applying at the data source connection level. So it's not actually applying on the dashboard, and that is why the coffee market sales is not being updated. So how can we do this? There's a couple ways. The first way that I'm going to show you now and have you work through is going to be using a controller sheet. So a controller sheet is very simple to create. I might even take a second to show you how to do that. You can simply right-click, create a new worksheet. And now if I wanted to create a controller sheet based on my product category, all you need to do is drag product category to the row shelf as well as to the text shelf, and then uncheck the show header option. So now notice, once I size this out a little bit, that now we have those selections for you. So that's how you create the controller sheet. Now we're going to use the controller sheet to filter across data sources. Remember that when we showed all of the available options for our actions, to filter across data sources, typically we use the target filter field. And that option is going to, there's a link between the coffee sales data based on market is the same as region. So let's go through and work through that controller sheet to easily add that action to filter across the data source. So once again, we're going to go into the dashboard menu and add an action. It's going to be the filter action option. And we want to start with the controller sheet. That's where we're initially making that selection. And we want it to filter all of the other sheets on this dashboard. But we need to make sure we're using the target filter fields. So when I select selected fields, we first want to add the filter from the Superstore example for region, as well as from the second data source, which is our access file. We want to have that be based on the market field. Let me go ahead and click OK and show you what happens. So now when I make a selection, I specified that, pause for a second. So it was important that we added our selected fields, and our source field is that region. That's what's in the controller sheet. And our target field is what's in our secondary data source sheet, which is our copy information. And once again, I like to run on select. Now you'll notice that when I make a selection, it's only filtering down the copy sales. So the reason for that is we specified that when we're selecting on the controller sheet, it's only filtering that region or market field on the copy sales. So I'm sure as you guys were running through this, you ran into the same issue. So you also need to add a second target filter. So let's go back and edit that action. And in this case, we're going to add the filter for when the region field is going to filter to just the region field. So if we add that secondary target filter, you'll now notice that we can easily make a selection and it filters all of my sheets on my view. This is going to be very useful to you when you have two separate data sources or when you have different levels of detail. That's when you're going to use the selected target filters. So next, we're going to go ahead and move on to our idea of a table of contents. And the reason for that is we want to be able to filter from one dashboard to another. Now, there's a couple ways to do this. I first created what's called this table of contents. And it's very simple to create, just adding a calculated field with parentheses and a string to add in a value for go to dashboard 1, for example. Now, based on the selection, we know that we can add in an action from a dashboard to another dashboard. So let's add in that action really quick. So we're going to add the action from this dashboard from the go to dashboard 1 sheet to any of our other dashboards that we have within the same workbook. So I'm going to have this filter back to our dashboard exercise 1 that we created. And you can choose how you want this to run. I like to run on select because I have this green arrow that serves as a button, essentially. So now when I add that in, I can make a selection, and it's going to bring me back to dashboard exercise 1. Very useful to provide this type of interactive navigation to your end users because you might have 10 or 15 dashboards in one workbook. So this is a case where you want to be able to allow them to make a selection and filter to another dashboard. I'm also going to use this same idea to create another table of contents sheet to not only show you how to create it, but often what I've noticed when working with customers is they have dashboards and workbooks. They have many workbooks. Sometimes one dashboard in one workbook relates to another dashboard. So now we'll go ahead and talk about URL actions to link from this dashboard to another dashboard. Typically, you have data on Tableau server, and it's a great use case of having multiple dashboards and being able to logically drill from one to another one on another place on Tableau server. So what we're going to do here is first we need to take and create the go to dashboard 1 type of look. So let me go ahead and just create a new worksheet. Now what you'll notice here is we have go to dashboard 1. This is a field that I created. It's a very simple calculated field with a string for go to dashboard 1, just providing a little bit of a selection there. From there, what we can do is we can just simply choose to duplicate it and then edit to say go to dashboard 2. So this is just creating a second button that you're going to be able to use. Now I can very easily drag this out onto the rows as well as have a shape. So I'm going to choose a shape for my mark type. And this is where I might then choose to add in and edit it to be an arrow, for example. It can be any shape you want. You can even bring in your own shapes as well. So now it's a little small. We can make it a little bigger once we add it to the dashboard. But notice now that we have our go to dashboard 2 in the button. I typically like to hide the field labels for rows just to get rid of that top piece of information. Let me just rename the sheet, for example, go to dashboard 2. Just double click and type in the name. Now let's add this sheet to that dashboard. So as you know from dashboard fundamentals, you can easily add in a sheet to the dashboard. And now we want to add in our action. So here I have a link or a URL. This is going to go to Tableau Public, which is essentially a hosted version of Tableau Server, but it's where you're going to have the ability to easily make a selection and filter to that URL. So what we want to do is we're going to create the URL action, but I need you to take the link here. Let's first edit the text and just choose to copy this URL. So I'm going to copy it, and now we're going to create a new action. So when I select this dashboard 2, it's going to go out to my Tableau Public dashboard. In your case, more than likely it'll be a Tableau Server dashboard, but any URL will work. In this case, we'll do analysis, dashboard, actions, and then add my action for URL. So once again, very similar. You're setting the source sheet, which is our go-to dashboard 2 sheet. And now you want to paste in the URL. So very simple, paste in the URL. We need to add in the URL action. And once again, we're selecting our source sheet as our go-to dashboard 2. We want to run it on select. And this is where we can then paste in that URL. That's when you make a selection. That's where the target URL will be. Now you notice when I make a selection to go to dashboard 2, it's going to take me out to my browser and navigate to my Tableau Server view. This is really effective when you're on Tableau Server. If I had a button here, it will take me back to another dashboard on Tableau Server. So that's a common use case for users that do have Tableau Server. Without Tableau Server, more than likely you're going to need those dashboards in the same workbook, or you just won't have that logical navigation as I showed here. So now let's go to more examples of URL actions. So in this case, we added in our URL to the action. In other cases, you might have the URL in your data source. So this is something that is a training resources guide that our product consultants often give to our customers. If we do a custom workbook, we try to remember to insert this worksheet. And what it does is it allows to, based on whatever your topic is that you want to learn about Tableau, we have the built-in link into the data. So now if I wanted to make a selection, it would take me to that URL. So to add in this action, once again, dashboard actions, add in our URL actions. But rather than typing in or copying and pasting a URL, you can also insert fields from your data source. So from this training resources view, I'm just going to insert that link that I have available in my data source. So now if I run that on select, what you'll notice is once again, it's going to, based on my selection, go out to my target URL, and now you can see that it's going to pull up my information about parameters. So this is going to be a good take-home for you when you have fields that you want, or topics in Tableau you want to learn more about. I would recommend taking this sheet, and you can use it to link up to our knowledge base as well as our videos. Lastly, for URL actions, we can even pass parameters. So as we inserted information from our data source to our target URL, so this dashboard here is really a web page object that is a Tableau public visualization. One thing that you can do is, based on a selection from anywhere in another dashboard, you can pass in that selection in the URL. So this is much more advanced, but it's a way to add in a filter when a filter is not exposed on the dashboard itself in another view. So I'm going to go ahead and add in this action. And it looks like I already have it available to you, but just to give you an idea of what it looks like, here we have our URL for our Tableau public dashboard. But what you'll notice is you can add in filters as URL parameters. So here I added in this piece of information for and market, so and any field in my data source equals. So that'll filter down the data that's not even in your view. So that way, if you forgot to add in a filter that you wanted in there, and you didn't want to go back to Tableau Desktop, you just want to quickly see what market equals east, that's where you can add in additional information in the URL on Tableau Server. But just to give you an idea here, you can then insert the market field from the data source. So based on when I make a selection on this market data source here, when I select east, it's now going to pass that data to my Tableau public visualization and only filter to the east region or the west region, even though on the dashboard itself, there's no option to select which region. So this is a much more advanced use case of URL actions and passing URL parameters. We do have a session at the conference which is going to go much more in depth and all the options available for URL actions. So now we have an exercise where I want you, based on a selection in our stock overview, I want you to be able to pass in the stock ticker from this sheet into our Google Finance web page object. So in order to do that, you first need the URL. Now, as a typical practice, you would go out to whatever website it is, copy and paste the URL, and you'll have to dissect it a little bit. For the purpose of this, to get the URL, you can click this drop-down arrow and choose to edit URL, and just simply choose to then copy it. Now, I'm going to create that action where we're going to, once again, create the URL action and paste in that URL. But notice at the end of the URL, we already have it set to Apple stock ticker. This is where you're then going to, once again, insert information from your data source. So from my stock overview sheet, I want to pass in my stock ticker to this URL and then have the view update. I'm going to run it on select. So now I easily make a selection, and it's going to render the Amazon stock ticker in this URL. And there you see it's now updated. So this is a way to link your Tableau dashboards on Tableau Server and in Tableau Desktop and link it to an external web system. So a common one would be Salesforce. If you have data about Salesforce.com, about your opportunities, link it to your Salesforce account and have it update the actual Salesforce on the web. So far we've discussed our basic building blocks for hierarchies and quick filters, and we've then moved into the 3 types of Tableau actions, and then lastly we'll move into parameters. So now we have run through a bunch of examples of creating interactive dashboards. We started with our basic building blocks at the core of Tableau, which was the hierarchies and the quick filters. Those should ideally be on every dashboard because it provides an interactive experience. Not only does it make the dashboard interesting because they can drill down to the information that's most important to them, but it really just allows for a more complete story, being able to filter down and interact with the data. Then we moved into Tableau Actions, which allow you to navigate from a sheet within a dashboard to another sheet in the same dashboard, or move from dashboard to dashboard. A lot of different options available there, and can do some very powerful things with your analysis and your dashboards. We discussed URL actions, how we can pass information from a Tableau server view or Tableau view to an external web system. In this case, it was Google Finance. We also looked at a Salesforce example. You're going to have this dashboard available to you so you can edit the actions and understand how they're being run. And then we also are going to be able to talk about parameters, but I would recommend attending the parameters session at the conference to get a more complete view of how to use parameters for interactivity. But once again, I thank you for attending this session. I hope you got some valuable techniques that you can implement in your own dashboards to really provide a full picture to whoever your report consumer is, whether it's an executive or an analyst on your team, being able to provide a dashboard that really delivers that impact that we talked about earlier. So once again, thank you for attending this